Welcome to Things You Don't Know. Today I'm here with Chandler Foster.
Today we're talking about rock and roll music, where it came from, why it mattered, and how it became one of the most powerful cultural forces of the 20th century.
Yeah, rock and roll is sometimes treated as if it suddenly appeared in the 1950s with loud guitars, teenage fans, and parents complaining that music had gone too far.
Oh, yes, Dr. Weaver. And the real story goes deeper than that. Rock and roll grew out of earlier American music traditions: blues, gospel, rhythm and blues, country, jazz, swing, boogie woogie, and folk.
Yes, indeed. It also grew out of social change. Migration, radio, records, race relations, which we're going to get into in another podcast.
I think we're going to get into a lot of that in many future podcasts, wouldn't you say, Dr. Weaver?
Yes, I would, sir. Youth culture, television, electric instruments, and the recording studio all helped shape the sound.
Absolutely, Dr. Weaver. So today we'll move through the roots of rock and roll into the 1950s explosion, the British invasion, the Beach Boys and Beatles creative, friendly contest, the rise of Dylan and folk rock, and the many directions that rock took afterwards.
Yeah. And one point we'll run through the whole episode. Rock and roll was never just one sound. It was a meeting place for many sounds, many communities, and many arguments about culture.
Now, I want to turn our attention to before rock and roll and the roots, how it got started. Now, to understand rock and roll, we have to begin before the phrase even became famous. A major foundation was the blues, especially African American blues from the South.
Yes, that is correct. The blues brought emotional directness. It dealt with love, work, hardship, humor, loss, and survival. Musically, blues shaped rock through its chord patterns, guitar style, vocal expression, and rhythm.
Now, gospel music was another major influence. Gospel brought strong singing, call and response patterns, emotional intensity, and a sense of musical build up.
Yeah, many early rock and roll performers had experience with church music for sure. Even when they moved into secular music, the power of gospel singing remained in their voices and stage presence.
Yes, rhythm and blues, or as it's more commonly called, R&B, was also central. By the 1940s, R&B was developing as an urban, danceable style with strong backbeats, piano, saxophone, and vocal groups.
Yeah, that backbeat became one of rock and roll's signatures. In much rock music, the emphasis falls on beats 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It gives the music its drive.
Now, country music matters too. Rock and roll, it wasn't just simply blues with electricity. Country, western swing, and hillbilly music helped shape early rock, especially rockabilly.
Yes. So before rock and roll had a name, the ingredients were already there. Blues feeling, gospel energy, R&B rhythm, country storytelling, jazz swing, and boogie woogie piano.
Now, rock and roll depended on technology: records, radio, jukeboxes, electric guitars, microphones, amplifiers, and later television all helped spread the music.
Yes, and that spread continues today through social media.
and other digital platforms.
That's correct. The electric guitar deserves special attention. Amplification made the guitar louder, sharper, and more central. It also is a little easier to play because you don't have to press the strings down as far on the fretboard, so you could be faster on runs. But what all that meant is a small band could now produce a very powerful sound.
Radio also changed everything. Young people could hear music from outside their immediate community. Black and white audiences could sometimes hear the same records, even in a segregated society.
Yeah, that point really matters, Chandler, quite a bit.
I'll say, Dr. Weaver,
Yeah, rock and roll crossed racial boundaries, but it did so unevenly and often unfairly. African American artists created many of the sounds that made rock possible, but white performers and white owned companies often gained greater access to national promotion and profit.
that does not mean white artists contributed nothing. We're not saying that at all, right, Dr. Weaver?
Absolutely not.
They really did, I have to say. Many did. But the history has to be honest here. Rock and roll was built from black musical traditions, interracial influence, commercial borrowing, and sometimes even exploitation.
Absolutely exploitation. And after World War II, teenagers became a major audience. More young people had spending money, leisure time, and a sense of identity separate from their parents.
And rock and roll became their music. It sounded energetic, direct, and different from the music of older generations.
Yeah, there's no single first rock and roll record. People still debate that question.
Oh, yes, they do. And some point to Rocket 88, recorded in 1951 by Jackie Branston and his Delta Cats, with Ike Turner's band behind it. It had a driving rhythm, car centered excitement, and a distorted guitar sound that felt very rock and roll.
Others point to artists like Fats Domino, whose New Orleans piano style helped define early rock and roll. His sound brought warmth, rhythm, and a relaxed but powerful swing.
And Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Oh man, and I just have to say, I love every time I think about her. My hair just on the back of my neck just stands up. Her voice just moves me. And she also deserves attention here. She was the gospel performer whose electric guitar style and commanding stage presence, and boy, she did have one. It influenced later rock musicians.
Yes, it did. By the mid 1950s, rock and roll had moved into the center of American popular culture.
And Chuck Berry was one of the key figures here. His guitar style, his clever songwriting, and focus on teenage life helped define what rock and roll would become.
Yeah, Barry, he wrote about cars, school, dancing, music, and young people trying to find freedom inside ordinary life. He also helped establish the guitar as the leading instrument of rock.
And Little Richard, he brought an explosive energy. His voice, piano playing speed, and his stage presence made rock and roll sound urgent.
Yeah, his nickname was Screamin' Little Richard, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Okay. Bo Diddley, he brought a beat that became instantly recognizable. Buddy Holly, helped shape the idea of the self contained rock band that wrote, played, and recorded its own material.
And then came Elvis Presley,
Yes, Elvis the Pelvis.
and he became the most famous rock and roll performer in the 1950s.
You got it. Elvis combined country, blues, gospel, and rhythm and blues influence. His voice, his movement, Elvis the Pelvis, appearance, and television presence made him a national phenomenon.
His rise also shows the racial complexity of the period. Elvis admired black music, and he helped bring rock and roll to a massive white audience. At the same time, many black artists who shaped the sound did not receive equal recognition or reward.
Yeah, that's true. Parents, politicians, and religious leaders sometimes saw rock and roll as dangerous. They worried about dancing, sexuality, racial mixing, juvenile delinquency, and the breakdown of older manners.
And for teenagers, that criticism often made the music even more attractive. It's sort of like forbidden fruit. The more you're not supposed to have it, the more you want it, right, Dr. Weaver?
Yes, indeed. By the late 1950s, early rock and roll faced setbacks. Some major artists disappeared from the center of the scene for different kinds of reasons.
Yeah, Elvis entered the army. Little Richard temporarily left rock and roll for religious reasons, and Chuck Berry was having legal troubles. Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and the Big Bopper died in a plane crash in 1959.
Yes, and I do remember that. The payola scandals also damaged trust in radio. Payola involved record companies or promoters paying disc jockeys to play certain records, often without proper disclosure.
At the same time, some of the rawer energy of rock was softened by the music industry. Teen idols and cleaner pop productions became more common.
Yeah, but rock and roll did not disappear. It was morphing, changing. Some of its next major developments would come from across the Atlantic.
In the early 1960s, young musicians in Britain were listening closely to American blues, R&B, rock and roll, and soul records.
Groups like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Animals, the Yardbirds, and the Who were shaped by American music. They learned from Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Buddy Holly, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and many others.
And the Beatles brought a new level of songwriting, harmony, studio experimentation, and mass popularity. Their arrival in the United States in 1964 helped ignite what became the British invasion.
Yeah, the Rolling Stones leaned more directly into blues and R&B influence. Their public image was rougher and more rebellious than the Beatles' early image.
And the British invasion did something interesting. American music across the ocean changed in Britain and then came back to the United States in a new form.
That return helped many American listeners rediscover blues and early rock artists who had influenced British bands in the first place.
It also pushed rock toward the idea of the band as a creative unit. Fans became interested not only in the singers, but in groups that wrote their own songs and developed their own sound.
Yeah. Now, no history of rock and roll should leave out the Beach Boys. One of my faves. At first, many listeners just associated them with surf music, cars, California youth culture, and close vocal harmonies.
And songs like Surfing USA and I Get Around and California Girls helped create the sunny image of American youth, especially Southern California youth.
Yeah, and one of my favorites, Little Surfer Girl. But the Beach Boys were more than a surf and car bands. Brian Wilson became one of the most important studio innovators in popular music, for sure.
And that brings us to one of the great creative exchanges in rock history, the Beach Boys and the Beatles.
Yeah, it wasn't a bitter feud in the usual sense. It was more like a contest of ambition and admiration. Each side heard what the other was doing and wanted to go further.
The Beatles' Rubber Soul pushed Brian Wilson to think about the album as a complete artistic statement, not just a collection of singles.
Yes, and guess what he responded with? Brian Wilson responded with Pet Sounds in 1966. That album moved the Beach Boys beyond their earlier image. It used complex harmonies, unusual instruments, emotional lyrics, and careful studio construction.
And Pet Sounds influenced many musicians, including the Beatles. Paul McCartney has often been associated with admiration for the album, especially its melodic and emotional depth.
The Beatles then pushed further with Revolver and Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. These records helped confirm that rock albums could be treated as serious studio works.
And Brian Wilson continued the challenge with Good Vibrations, a highly ambitious record built from different recorded sections. It showed how the studio itself could become an instrument.
Yes, Wilson's planned Smile project was meant to go even further, but it became difficult to complete and was shelved for many years.
Well, the Beach Boys' impact was quite enormous. They helped expand rock and pop harmony, studio production, and the idea that popular music could be both accessible and sophisticated at the same time.
Right. And the Beach Boys Beatles exchange helped change the album format. The question was no longer only, can this song be a hit? It became, can this album be a complete artistic experience?
And I have to say, Dr. Weaver, I also think that it brought out the creative juices in each band. They each pushed the other to their full potential in a way. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And they complemented each other. They publicly. I mean, they publicly said, "Hey, this is." Paul McCartney said, "God Only Knows" was the prettiest love song that he had ever heard.
Now, another major figure in the 1960s was Bob Dylan. Dylan did not begin as a rock and roll performer in the same way as Chuck Berry or Elvis did. He came from folk music.
Yeah, but I must say, Dylan changed her rock by expanding what lyrics could do. His songs brought social criticism, literary imagery, political questioning, and personal ambiguity into popular music.
When Dylan moved toward electric music, it was controversial. Some folk bands saw it as a betrayal, but songs like a Rolling Stone helped prove that rock could carry complex lyrics and serious themes.
Yeah, Dylan's influence was not mainly about vocal polish. In fact, his early voice was often rough, nasal, and direct, but the directness helped the words stand out.
Yes. Then, in 1969, Dylan surprised people again with Nashville Skyline. His voice on that album was smoother, warmer, and closer to a country crooner style.
Yeah, that shift mattered because Dylan had already been seen as a voice of protest and counterculture. He lost a lot of that by shunning Woodstock and actually calling the police on some people from Woodstock who had come over to see his place because he lived right near where the festival was held. But by turning to country music, a more polished vocal sound, and a quieter public image, he complicated what fans expected from him.
His absence from Woodstock also became symbolically important. Dylan lived near Woodstock, New York, and people expected him to be connected to that moment. Instead, he avoided the festival and performed at the Isle of Wight in Britain.
Yeah, it would be too simple to say his popularity collapsed only because he skipped Woodstock, but it certainly didn't help him any. His role did change. Some fans felt he had stepped away from the counterculture that had claimed him and supported him. I am one of those people.
And then in 1970, Self Portrait disappointed many critics and listeners. Now, Dylan remained important, but he was no longer the unquestioned spokesman for the generation.
Yeah, and that's a part of rock history too. Artists who help define a movement often resist being trapped by it. Dylan's career shows how rock could include reinvention, retreat, and public backlash.
By the late 1960s, rock had become more than just dance music or teenage entertainment. It became a vehicle for social commentary, experimentation, and identity.
Folk rock, soul, psychedelic rock, and blues rock all expanded the field.
Motown and soul music were also shaping popular music with extraordinary songwriting, vocals, and production. Artists like the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, and the Temptations reached huge audiences. Now, I am going to tell you a fun fact. Stevie Wonder and I both have a May 13th birthday.
Motown was not always labeled rock, but it influenced rock deeply. The boundaries between rock, soul, pop, and R&B were often pretty porous.
And psychedelic rock brought longer songs, unusual sounds, studio effects, and lyrics influenced by dreams, politics, spirituality, and altered states of consciousness. Like a quick example here, the song Iron Butterfly sings called Inagata Davida Baby. The original title was In the Garden of Eden Baby. And very briefly, Dr. Weaver, could you tell us what the meaning of that is?
Yeah, very briefly, I guess. It was just returning to the Garden of Eden, getting ourselves clean, getting ourselves thinking in a more humane, positive way. And also the notion that the girl he was singing about made him feel like he was in paradise.
That's pretty good, Dr. Weaver. Now, you were also going to tell us something about the electric guitar.
Yep, it became a whole lot more expressive. Amplifier feedback, distortion, wah, 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 and extended solos became part of rock's vocabulary.
Jimi Hendrix
Yeah.
transformed the guitar's role.
Mhm.
Yes, he did. I have to agree with that. He showed that the electric guitar could be rhythmic, melodic, noisy, beautiful, and experimental all at once.
Yes. By the end of the 1960s, rock had become central to youth culture. Festivals such as Monterey Pop, Woodstock, and the Isle of Wight showed the scale of the movement. Now, I would also encourage you to check out our episode on Woodstock. You'll find it quite interesting, I think.
Now, the 1970s did not have just one rock sound. Rock split into many branches.
Yeah, hard rock and heavy metal grew louder and heavier. Bands such as Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and Deep Purple helped shape a sound built around powerful riffs, volume, and darker themes.
And progressive rock moved in a different direction. Bands used long compositions, unusual time signatures, classical influence, and concept albums.
Yes, indeedy. Progressive rock showed rock's ambition, but it also drew some criticism. Some listeners felt it became too elaborate and distant from rock's direct energy. I disagree.
Yeah, I tend to disagree with that too, actually, Dr. Weaver. Southern rock blended blues, country, and rock with regional identity. Glam rock played with theatrical appearance, gender presentation, and performance style.
Yep, singer songwriters also became important. Artists focused on personal lyrics, acoustic textures, and reflective storytelling. I'm thinking of Simon and Garfunkel here.
And then punk arrived as a reaction against what some saw as overproduced rock. Punk strips the music down. It was fast, direct, and often angry.
Yeah, the Ramones, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, and many others showed that rock could return to simplicity while still sounding new and confrontational.
Punk also encouraged the do it yourself culture. You didn't need perfect technique or expensive production to make music that mattered.
In the 1980s, MTV changed how rock was marketed and understood. Music videos made image more important than ever.
Yes, and rock became more visual, polished, and theatrical. Hair metal and glam metal brought big guitars, big choruses, and highly styled performances.
Yes, and at the same time, alternative rock and college rock were growing outside the mainstream. Talking about bands like REM, The Cure, and The Smiths, they offered different sounds and attitudes too.
In the 1980s, also saw rock interacting with pop, electronic music, and hip hop. Some audiences resisted these changes, but music rarely stays inside one boundary.
That's correct. In the early 1990s, grunge broke into the mainstream from the Pacific Northwest, especially like in Seattle.
Bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains, which is one of my favorite bands, brought heavier guitars, emotional intensity, and rejection of the polished image associated with some 1980s rock.
Grunge had roots in punk, metal, indie rock, and underground scenes. It was not as sudden as it appeared to be.
The 1990s also included pop punk, industrial rock, rap rock, Britpop, jam bands, and many other forms of rock. Rock, it wasn't just one central highway anymore. It was a whole network of roads that led to many different places, I would have to say.
Yep. In the 2000s and beyond, rock continued, but the music industry changed dramatically.
Digital downloads, file sharing, streaming, social media, and home recording changed how music was made and distributed.
The old model, radio play, record stores, major labels, and television exposure, no longer controlled everything in the same way.
Rock bands could reach audiences online, but they also faced a more crowded musical world. Listeners no longer had to choose from a limited set of radio stations or albums in a store.
Garage rock revival, indie rock, emo, metalcore, post punk revival, and many other styles kept rock alive in different forms.
At the same time, rock became part of a larger musical inheritance. Its sounds appear in pop, country, hip hop, film scores, video games, and advertising.
Some people ask whether rock is dead. That a question appears like every few years.
But rock has never been one fixed thing. It has always borrowed, changed, argued with itself, and split into new forms.
So, why did rock and roll matter so much?
Well, first, it changed popular music. It made rhythm, amplification, and direct emotional performance central to modern sound.
Second, it changed youth culture. Rock and roll gave young people music that felt like their own.
And third, it crossed social boundaries, especially racial boundaries, though I have to say, not always fairly or equally.
Fourth, it changed the album. The Beach Boys, Beatles, Dylan, Hendrix, and others helped show that popular music could be more than 3-minute singles.
And fifth, it changed performance. The musician became not only just a singer or a player, but a public personality, a visual figure, and sometimes even a symbol of rebellion.
Yep, rock and roll also changed what popular music could discuss. Could be about dancing and romance, but also war, civil rights, alienation, gender, work, technology, and personal identity.
And perhaps most importantly, rock and roll showed that music history is not clean and separate. Blues, gospel, country, jazz, R&B, soul, folk, punk, metal, pop, and hip hop all touch one another. They're all connected in their own special way.
The history of rock and roll is not simply the story of a few stars. It is a story of cultural mixing, technological change, racial tension, teenage identity, business decisions, and artistic invention.
It began before the name even became famous. It grew from blues, gospel, rhythm and blues, country, and other traditions. It exploded in the 1950s, expanded in the 1960s, and split into many forms in the 1970s, became visual in the 1980s, reinvented itself in the 1990s, and continues to echo today.
Yes, I've got to say, a lot of those periods of time were about protest and wanting to change things, make society better. The Beach Boys and Beatles showed how competition could become creative influence. And others showed how rock could become more literary, and also how artists could resist being trapped by the audience's expectations.
And if there is one lesson in the story, it may be this: rock and roll was never pure, never still, and never owned by only one group.
Yeah, it was built from exchange, conflict, borrowing, creativity, and performance. Sometimes that exchange was generous, sometimes it was unfair, but the result changed world culture.
Rock and roll gave people a sound for movement, frustration, joy, rebellion, and belonging.
Okay, we could go on and talk about this topic for a long time.
Yes, we could. We could get lost in this, couldn't we, Dr. Weaver?
Yes. So we're going to go ahead and say that's it for this episode of Things You Don't Know.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Things You Don't Know. we would like for you to comment some of what you would like to hear and some of the traditions that you would like to hear. And as always, keep asking what you don't know yet.
Join us next time as we continue looking at the stories behind the ideas, events, and everyday things that shaped our world. Goodbye